So J.D. Salinger is dealing with some of these issues of isolation and alienation and conformity that the psychologists and the sociologists are worried about. But if we were to look at another author who's dealing with some of these issues, but also putting them in the context of a worldview that's robust, that's rich, that's complex, that's maybe better equipped to provide us with some answers or some direction, I would say Flannery OConnor, all right? So, for instance, if we were to look at Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, right? It centers on this family, this very ordinary family, 1950s family in the South. And none of the characters are particularly appealing, right? Like the grandmother, we might say, is the central figure in the beginning of the story, but she's not a particularly appealing person, right? Like she's sort of, selfish and not always honest and a little bit like kind of racist, and she's just like not appealing, right? And really none of the family members are. And it's a fairly like ordinary family, but then they run into this like really weird experience. And so one thing that's really important for Flannery O'Connor, she's like, her stories are not meant to be realistic. They're meant to be strange and odd and shocking and weird. And part of what she's doing is she's trying to like shake people in the 1950s who've become like complacent and who've, become convinced like, oh, I'm a good, church-going person. I don't really have to worry about, anything. And I can just kind of pursue my life seeking whatever material advantages or whatever advantages make sense for me to pursue, right? She's trying to like shake people and wake them up and say, look, Christianity is not about being complacent. Christianity calls you to conversion all the time, right? And so these like shocking moments in her stories are these opportunities for her to pose these questions to her characters or pose these questions to her readers about spirituality, right? And the central question of that story is posed by the misfit, this criminal who's escaped from prison. And, part of the thing that's going on here, right, is that here's this criminal who's, he's like Holden Caulfield gone off the rails times 35. Like, he's really gone off the rails, right? Like, he didn't fit in. He's an outsider. He's maladjusted. He's sensitive. He's thought about things a lot. He's been maybe mistreated in his life. There's a lot of similar, but this guy's come to the conclusion, right, that really society wasn't working for him. So why should he follow society's rules? There's no reason for him to, okay? Because he wasn't getting anything out of it, right? So really he's going to make up his own rules. It's kind of this Nietzschean worldview, right? He's going to will to power. He's going to create his own set of rules that work for him. Okay, now, but he poses, I said, as the central question of that short story, right, which is whether or not Christ is who he said he was, whether or not Christ is God, whether or not Christ rose from the dead, whether or not Christ raised people from the dead, right? Because the misfit says, look, if Christ didn't do any of those things, then really there is no reason to play by society's rules because society has not served me well. It mistreated me, right? So he's going to make up his own rules. But if those things are true and Christ did those things, right, then I can play by society's rules only insofar as they are consistent with Christ's teaching, or only insofar as they promote the gospel. So in other words, doing what society says, conforming to society, that doesn't matter. Forget that, right? Everything comes down to Christ. Like, do I believe in him or not? If not, I'm going to do whatever I want. If I do believe in him, I'm going to drop everything and do his will, right? And the grandmother was the one that brought up Jesus Christ in the story initially, right? Because she's using all these different ways to try to convince the misfit that he's not a bad guy, right? And like, oh, you're a nice guy and you wouldn't hurt, she says, you wouldn't hurt a nice lady and pray, just pray. And she's trying to do she's saying all these kind of like niceties, these kind of like easy answers that are common, and he's just kind of like, they don't matter to him, right? But then it pushes him to ask her and ask the reader that central question, right? Which is that everything comes down to whether you believe in Christ or not, right? And if you believe he's God and you believe he rose from the dead and you believe he raised people from the dead, and he's going to raise you from the dead, that changes everything. That changes everything, or quote, as the Misfit says, throws the balance off, unquote, right? So you have to follow him if that's the case, right? And it has to change everything, and nothing else, none of the pursuit of wealth, reputation, none of it matters. All that matters is, are you following Christ? Are you doing what he's calling you to, and are you serving him through others, right? Through your service to others. And of course, like that central kind of, one of those central themes of like reputation comes back in at the end. He shot the whole family, the Misfit has. He shot the grandmother. And then he says she would have been a good woman, right? The story is a good man is hard to find. She would have been a good woman if somebody had been there to shoot her every day of her life, right? So, in other words, being faced with the reality of death, it puts in perspective, right, what matters. It puts in perspective that central question of whether I truly believe in Christ or not, right? And it forces us to act in one way or the other, right? And so I think maybe what we can infer from the statement, does the grandmother die a good death? Did she embrace Christ in the last moments? She certainly seems to reach out with compassion, this sort of like odd way right before her death. So maybe that's evidence of it, right? But that statement, she would have been a good woman if someone had been there to shoot her every day of her life, right? These moments of crisis, these moments of odd, strange, like brutality, are these opportunities then to really face the things that matter and the spiritual realities that underlie our experiences.